There are more possible chess games than atoms in the universe. The most complex game ever has spawned as many different characters as variations to be played. Some claimed speaking to God, discussing openings, some escaped hospitals to play a match, and some slowly lost themselves on their relentless chase towards perfection. This video is about Bobby Fischer and his lifelong fight against the world, the FBI, and himself. Robert James Fischer was born in 1943 into a single-mother family with his older sister Joan and his mother Regina. Money was always tight, so Regina was working multiple jobs to be able to afford living. To keep Bobby entertained, Regina got her son some riddle booklets with mazes to track. Young Bobby loved them and solved them as quickly as he could, proudly presenting his success to his older sister. His competitive nature revealed itself early. Whenever he failed to solve the mazes on the first try, he would angrily throw away his pen and start crying. He hated losing. He hated being anything but the best. Soon he found Ludo to be more fun. Bobby enjoyed having the chance to punish his opponents with a lucky dice throw. Whenever somebody would kick his pieces out, Bobby would get extremely angry and quit the game. He soon stopped playing games with luck as a component, as this was a factor that he couldn't control. One day his sister saw a chess set in the dollar store and brought it home to keep her energetic little brother busy. The board games were Bobby's only way to distract himself whenever he was alone, which would happen often. Quickly he was winning both against his sister, that was double his age, and his mother, whenever they had time to play against him. He looked for stronger opponents, and because nobody else was there, he started playing against himself. At the time, Bobby had no real friends, so after each move, he would look at the board from a whole new perspective, trying to imitate how it must feel playing against a real person. Playing chess and beating other people boosted his confidence immensely, and playing against himself, he would win every game, one way or the other. Regina knew that her son was incredibly clever. At 6 years of age, he would ask her about concepts of the universe and infinity, but when asked what 2 times 2 equals, he would start struggling. His mother switched jobs regularly, and the Fischers started moving from one place to another. For Bobby, this made him lose the feeling of having a real home, a place to fall back to. He wouldn't bother to get to know new people or make connections of any kind. First, because he wasn't the most social, but second, because they would be cut off after some time anyway. On a visit to relatives, he came across a book about commented chess games by Grandmaster Siegbert Tarrasch, and immediately was hooked. The number of openings, all leading to different games, was astonishing. From this point on, a chess set and a book about chess theory were everything Bobby needed around him. His closest companion was himself. By the attempts to support Bobby with his hobby, his mother got him into a public chess event, where the chess master Max Pavey played 7 games simultaneously and Bobby was one of his opponents. Regina couldn't believe her eyes when she saw her son, who usually couldn't stand still, in complete tunnel vision. Pavey had played thousands of games and brutally beat Fischer without spending more than 2 seconds on a move. After losing, Bobby burst into tears. For him, this defeat was a humbling experience. But eventually the euphoric feeling he experienced when beating other players overcame him again. With chess, he had found something where he was good at, and therefore could use it to impress others, find validation, and be acknowledged. As with many other things, Bobby understood quickly. The better he would be at playing chess, the more he would be acknowledged, respected, and maybe even admired. His vision now was clear. Bobby Fischer is going to be world champion. What he didn't know, Carmine Negro, the club president of the Brooklyn Chess Club, watched this game and noticed something. Bobby played moves that he shouldn't have played. Not in the sense that they were avoidable blunders, but in a sense that showed how deep of an understanding he had already gotten of the game. They proved he had developed the ability to look at the game from a certain perspective, on a level which was far from normal. Immediately after the game, Carmine Negro invited Bobby to join his club for free. Never before had a child entered the club. Bobby was by far the youngest member, but he would not let the cigar-smoking adults around him intimidate him. and Negro got to work. Bobby learned basic opening tactics, positioning fundamentals and endgame patterns, and quickly improved his game. Negro knew that Bobby was growing up without a father, and felt like he could become his mentor, teaching him not only chess, but other aspects of life. Unfortunately, even with like-minded people around him, Bobby soon faced exclusion. Insulting comments towards grown club members and emotional outbursts led to a general disliking of the new chess talent, who was just 7 years old. Many members of the chess club stopped interacting and playing against him, as they feared the shame of losing to a child. Bobby stayed alone. Over the following years, Bobby's skills continued to improve. Soon he didn't need a board in front of him to understand difficult combinations. His mind was all he needed. This single-mindedness certainly contributed to becoming a better player, but it also sowed the seeds of an isolated mind that started to be filled with arrogance and a distrust to authority. Being alone all the time with almost no other social contact led to a secluded child who, behind the surface, was incredibly lonely.
His social skills deteriorated.
He didn't have many friends. His life became chess. Chess became his life.
At age 14, Bobby became the youngest ever U.S. chess champion.
Work on you. It says teenager strategy defeats all comers. This young man's name is Bobby Fischer, and already he is the United States chess champion.
At this point, there was no doubt that this kid was a genius. But at the same time, something about Bobby's behavior changed. His mind narrowed more and more. The only thing that mattered was playing chess. He dropped out of school and isolated, distanced himself from the few people close to him. One of those was his mentor and somewhat father figure, Negro, who desperately tried to help Bobby growing into a good and mature man with the right values. Regina was starting to become worried about the extent Bobby's isolation had taken, seeking help from a therapist. After a long conversation with Bobby, the therapist saw nothing unusual, just a normal kid with a deep passion for his hobby. Regina shouldn't worry about him because he doesn't harm others or himself with it. This statement would turn out to be a lie. Although Bobby had become a well-known chess player, he earned very little money. While top Russian players were well paid, chess held much less significance in America.
No chess player ever made much money in those days.
And with all the success he had on the chessboard, his growing ego led to the reputation of an emotional child with an outspoken, sometimes abrasive nature. Bobby started to despise non-chess players, and the only thing he hated even more were weak players. Various chess magazines started criticizing him, claiming he didn't deserve his success.
Bobby Fischer is a stubborn young man. Sometimes he fights for principle, more often just for himself.
It's important to note that at the time he was still a 15-year-old kid who didn't understand why his ambition caused so much backlash. People either admired Bobby for his unconventional genius, or they hated him for disrespecting the values of chess and believed that eventually the Soviet players would end his career anyway. The Soviets had dominated the chess world for decades.
Я кричал: вы что ж там обалдели? Что ж вы уронили шахматный пристав?
The nation's collective excellence at the game was a point of great pride, a form of prestige and honor for the whole country. The sheer number of chess clubs resulted in an army of grandmasters that monopolized the top of the world leaderboard.
Он даже спит с доской, сила в нем.
They won every tournament.
Everybody of talent was cultivated, was given financial help, coaching. All the top players were privileged people.
In a tournament in Moscow, Bobby played against top-tier Soviet players and noticed something strange. In between or even during games, the Soviet players got together and discussed a devious tactic. To make sure a Soviet player would win, players with fewer points aimed for draws rather than wins, which led to their own elimination, but it prevented rivals from catching the leader. Bobby hated this tactic, calling it a betrayal of true competition. Another part of that tactic included distracting their opponents by staring them down or making insulting comments. Bobby often teared up whenever he was mocked, unaware it was a tactic. This marked the beginning of a hatred towards the Soviets that would last a lifelong.
You don't like the Russians?
The Russians have cheated at chess. They've tried every way to avoid me, to avoid giving me a chance for a match, and they've slandered my name. They're just dead afraid of me. They have been for years.
But all the hatred and critique really got to Bobby, although he never admitted that. Around his 17th birthday, Bobby attended another tournament and players hardly recognized him. Until then, Bobby had always worn jeans with a t-shirt and sneakers. But now, he appeared in a fine suit with an Italian tie and black leather shoes. He wasn't the emotionless machine people thought he was. He didn't want to be hated and seen as an uncultivated child, but as a master of chess. At the same time, another major storm was picking up: the Cold War. A decades-long struggle for global supremacy between the capitalist United States and the communist Soviet Union. Since the late 1940s, political tensions between the two world powers had been escalating. Interestingly, the rivalry between Fischer and the Soviet chess community was directly involved in this political event. Because chess was a symbol of national intellect and therefore an indicator to technological advancement as a country, chess tournaments became platforms where the Soviet Union could project its intellectual strength and cultural sophistication to the world. And America's plan was it to beat the Russians in their own game. Literally.
For a communist regime, keeping the crown was very important ideologically. This communist state took over chess to use it as proof of intellectual superiority over decadent West. Everybody knew that the crown has to remain in the Soviet Union.
Two battles emerged parallel to each other: the USA versus the Soviet Union, Fischer versus the Russian chess army, capitalism versus communism, fast-paced attack versus conservative defense. The chess championship title was of high political interest, so much so that the FBI and the KGB got involved. In 1965, 22-year-old Fischer was invited to the Capablanca Memorial Tournament in Havana. But with Cuban-American relations at their worst, only journalists were allowed to enter the country.
The United States State Department has restricted travel by Americans to Cuba.
What nobody knew, at the time the FBI had already kept a close eye on both Fischer and his mother, supposedly because the latter was thought to be a communist. In addition, the FBI simply didn't see a legitimate reason for anyone to travel to a politically conspicuous country like Cuba only to play chess. But with the help of Che Guevara and Fidel Castro, two of Cuba's most influential revolutionaries, Fischer played from a small room in New York with a teleprinter that would send each of his moves directly to Cuba.
For this reason, U.S. chess champion Bobby Fischer is competing by teletype.
Fidel Castro called the participation of Fischer a great propaganda victory for Cuba. Fischer got second, and the Soviets realized that he had become a serious threat to the chess monopoly. A secret lab was built where a group of scientists' sole purpose was to study Fischer's game, his decision-making process, and his psyche. And their concerns would soon turn out to be justified. In the following years, Fischer maintained a relentless and almost psychotic focus. In 1971, Fischer reached the candidates matches to earn the right to challenge world champion Boris Spassky. He crushed Soviet Grandmaster Mark Taimanov, winning all of their 6 games without a single draw, effectively ending Taimanov's career. The Soviet Union called his loss a national disgrace, cut his pay, and imposed traveling restrictions. Fischer's aggressive playstyle left no room for the Soviets to rely on their draw tactics. What he enjoyed most was not just winning, but beating his opponent.
And what's the pleasure? What's the moment of pleasure for you, Ispo?
Oh, the greatest pleasure. Well, when you break his ego, this is where it's at. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
And when
For the first time in 24 years, a non-Soviet player had a real chance to claim the title of world chess champion. In preparation to his fight against Boris Spassky, he completely isolated himself in a hotel in New York. Although he presented himself confidently, he was nervous. He didn't know if he had a chance against the mighty Soviet chess machine with all their power and magnitude.
This is true. It does attract an egocentric crowd, you know.
Yeah.
It's just you and the board and your opponent and you're trying to prove something.
Where it's at. It's the apex, you know, my whole life, taking on this Spassky. This has really been, my whole career has been building up to this one point. This is really the big match. It's just, you know, it's for everything, it's for title.
His Soviet opponent was facing similar emotions. Spassky knew how Taimanov was treated after losing. Fischer's challenge was seen as a direct assault on the Soviet state, so the Soviet Union gathered a whole armada of its greatest chess theorists to prepare Spassky for the upcoming match. Against Fischer, against America. German magazine Time released an article about how Fischer's win would be one of the most important propaganda victories in the Cold War. It was decided that the match would take place in Reykjavik, Iceland, a neutral ground for both participants. As the showdown approached, signs of the immense stress Fischer experienced began to surface.
He was extremely depressed. He felt that he was being influenced by these Russians, and he also was scared of the Mossad.
He's a lonely person, and that chess gives him the companionship that he lacks.
He treated everybody else quite awful.
He's tedious, he's arrogant, he's inconsiderate. Basically, people think that there's something wrong with the man.
He booked multiple flights to Iceland, insisting that each one of them carries fresh oranges to prepare orange juice. Fischer insisted that the juice is pressed in front of him to make sure he wasn't drugged or poisoned.
I don't know, I read that you get little radiation from it.
Then he cancelled every flight and demanded that the prize fund for the match was increased or else he wouldn't play.
Fischer has a moral to pass on. It is that the important thing in the game is not in winning, but in getting the highest percentage of the gate money.
24 hours before the first game was supposed to start, Fischer still was in New York when his phone rang. When he answered, Henry L. Kissinger, the national security advisor himself, was on the other line. After a tense 10-minute conversation, Fischer promised to play. The interest of the United States had priority over his personal demands.
I feel that the prestige of this country is at stake.
Some people have suggested this was psychological warfare against Spassky on your part. Did that figure into it?
No, I don't believe in psychology. I believe in good moves.
Finally, the most pivotal chess match in history and a significant moment in the Cold War could begin.
The most intellectually exhausting battle known to the mind of man. The World Chess Championship.
The World Chess Championship match between Boris Spassky, the defending champion from the Soviet Union, and 29-year-old Bobby Fischer, the challenger from the United States.
People stayed home from work.
People were lining up in front of TV sets in department stores.
Fischer earned the right to challenge the reigning world champ.
With millions looking at the chessboard where everybody knew history was about to be made, it seemed like the whole world was holding its breath. Spassky, who played white and therefore would make the first move, arrived early. Minutes passed and Fischer's seat patiently waited for its occupant. At exactly 5 p.m., the match started.
The clock has now been started. It was officially 5 o'clock in Reykjavik.
Spassky made his first move, and Fischer's time was running.
Spassky is obviously anxious about the whereabouts of Mr. Fischer.
After 12 minutes, Fischer finally arrived. The first relief.
Here comes Fischer, coming on the stage saying that he was caught in traffic, and I think Spassky was visibly relieved.
He looked stressed and extremely worried as he rushed to his seat and made his move.
There's his first move, one knight, king, bishop, 3.
During the game, he left the board twice, once complaining about the temperature of the orange juice, and another time demanding a specific kind of yogurt, which the organizers didn't have. Luckily, a local restaurant could help out. Later in the game, Fischer complained about a light post and the cameras, which would both heavily affect his concentration.
He goes over to protest those cameras being there.
I feel disturbed. I cannot have that, please.
His play also seemed distracted. The audience patiently waited for a move that would reveal a genius master plan, without success.
He did something that hardly anyone would do except a rank amateur.
After 29 moves, Fischer blundered his bishop, and soon he had lost the first game.
He made a colossal beginner's blunder.
Had Fischer finally reached a point where the stress was just too much, where the expectations the Western world had of him too much to carry, one can only imagine how it must feel being in Fischer's situation. Imagine with each move in between your fingertips you hold the expectations of a whole nation, and with one wrong move you would destroy everything. When the second game started, Fischer again was nowhere near the board. The referee started his clock as Fischer was playing with white and obliged to make the first move.
So Fischer's time is now ticking.
Again, the crowd and millions of chess fans around the world stared at two empty chairs, a chessboard in between them, and a waiting referee. Spassky had retreated in his personal room. The only thing that disturbed this absolute standstill was a small turning symbol on the clock, indicating it was Fischer's turn. 5 minutes passed. 20 minutes passed. Where was Fischer?
If Fischer doesn't show up by the time 1 hour has elapsed, he forfeits the game automatically.
At the half-hour mark, this nerve-wracking scenery still hadn't changed. After exactly 1 hour, the referee stopped the clock and declared Spassky to be the winner. Fischer did not come on time. After his loss in the second round, the New York Times publicly begged Fischer to carry on fighting for the title. His telephone rang again, and this time it was the President of the United States who reached out to Fischer. Richard Nixon commissioned a photographer to forward a message in his place. Fischer would be welcomed in the White House after this event, regardless the outcome. Fischer, who had already booked tickets back to the US, decided to stay under one condition: no cameras.
Fischer said he would boycott the match until hidden movie cameras are removed from the playing hall. The promoters said the entire financial structure of the match depends on recording and exhibiting the play.
He asked to put the camera away.
Mr. Spassky, are you happy with the arrangements for today's game?
In a small room away from the crowd and only one hidden camera, the third game started. Spassky moved a piece, Fischer moved a piece. Move after move, Fischer slowly managed to improve his positioning and left Spassky little room for adapting. After 41 moves, Spassky resigned, and Fischer had won his first game. His opponent was still in the lead by one win, but Fischer had secured a victory, and that marked a psychological breakthrough. He proved to himself that he was strong enough to beat Spassky. The fourth game ended in a draw, followed by 2 wins by Fischer in games 5 and 6. Game 7, draw. Game 8, win by Fischer. Game 9, draw. Game 10, win by Fischer. With the pressure that was building up, Spassky played increasingly defensive until game 11, where a controlled strategic game led to a win. After Spassky's counterattack, but with Fischer still slightly in the lead, the chess community noticed a change in Fischer's playstyle. Arguably the most aggressive player at the time started playing passively. Game 12, draw. Game 13, another win by Fischer. Game 14, another draw. Game 15, draw. Game 16, draw. Game 17, draw. Fischer seemed to be employing the very tactic he had sworn to dismantle, shutting down risk, aiming not for victory, but for the security of the draw. Yet, one could hardly blame him. The stakes were monumental, and Fischer was, above all, a competitor. No American had ever won the title, and perhaps this was his final blow against the Russians, as if he would let them feel how it is losing against the very tactic they had once used against him. Game 18, draw. Game 19, draw. Game 20, draw. In the last game, Fischer mobilized all his strength and won. And with that, he had beaten the world's best player Boris Spassky. he had claimed the title of world champion.
In the name of FIDE, the International Chess Federation, I proclaim Mr. Robert Fischer as the chess champion of the world.
On September 1st, 1972, 29-year-old Bobby Fischer completed what many had thought to be impossible. He defeated Boris Spassky, the Soviet chess machine, and in doing so, he shattered the myth of Soviet invincibility in the game they had long dominated.
Should have a name, no? But you didn't know it.
This is Bobby, the lone American hero.
In chess, Bobby Fischer.
A high school dropout, he was a grandmaster at 12 and U.S. chess champion at 14 years of age.
The victory was of course a personal milestone, but it also marked a seismic moment in both chess and Cold War history. A symbolic coup for the West in the ideological battle between two superpowers. For the Soviet Union, this loss was a major embarrassment. They had invested heavily in chess as part of their Cold War propaganda. At a time when the Vietnam War and domestic issues hurt US morale, Fischer's victory provided a moment of American success against the Soviets. For Fischer himself, this marked a life-changing moment. The poverty of his childhood, the relentless media criticism, the Soviet chess machine that plotted against him, and the crushing weight of Cold War pressure. He had beaten them all. Understandably, Fischer expected all of his problems to dissolve, but the path unfolded in unexpected ways. When Fischer returned to the United States, he was greeted like a national hero. The face of American intellectual supremacy. For the first time, chess was front-page news in America.
Listen, will you talk to us, Bobby?
The prize money and the admiration fulfilled many of the wishes Fischer had for a long time.
The king is dead. Not yet, he isn't.
Eating at restaurants or buying books without having to think about the prices was something the Fischers could never afford. Spassky, on the other hand, came home with the expected sense of national humiliation. The Soviets analyzed every move made in the championship to ensure it would never happen again. But while the Soviets rearmed, Fischer vanished. Seemingly overnight, he disappeared. Not playing competitive chess and hiding from cameras. Until in 1975, the time came to defend his title. But something in Fischer had changed. He had won the battle of his life, and with that, it seemed that he had lost his purpose.
Well, there must have been a tremendous...
It was. I woke up the day after the thing was over, and I just felt different, like something had been taken out of me.
Numerous demands of Fischer followed. One of them included changing the official chess rules.
World champion chess player has until midnight tonight to decide whether to abide by the international rules of chess or give up his title.
Some say Fischer looked for a way of not playing without simply giving up.
Part of him knew he could lose, and that's death to Bobby. He didn't want to risk that.
The International Chess Federation refused to accept his demands, and this time, no phone call was made, no revolutionary intervened, and no orange juice was served. Fischer forfeited his title without playing a single game. After losing the title, Fischer's life became increasingly obscure, and he slowly descended into what can only be called a kind of madness. He refused to play in tournaments, stopped paying taxes, and spent most of his time in complete seclusion.
But only he who never plays never loses.
Rarely would he surface for radio interviews, where his words were filled with conspiracy theories and controversial statements that made many former admirers question his sanity.
Finally, American chess master Bobby Fischer has added another controversy to his strange career.
It is one thing after another, and whenever you trace who's behind it, it's always the Jews. And now,
by people who had been who were being prosecuted, persecuted, investigated, whatever.
He sounded crazier and crazier. I told him he ought to go see a psychiatrist. He was in bad shape.
One of his most infamous quotes regarded the 9/11 disaster, where he stated that he, quote, applauds the act.
This is all wonderful news. It's time for the U.S. to get their heads kicked in. It's time to finish off the U.S. once and for all. It just shows you that what goes around comes around, even for the United States. You're happy? What happened? Yes, I applaud the act. Look, nobody gets...
Fischer was no longer the charismatic genius who had captivated the world in 1972. He was a control-driven ghost of himself, haunted by suspicion and distrust.
Persecution. They're the persecutors. Hitler said in Mein Kampf that the Jews are not the victims, but they're the victimizers.
Whenever he went out to eat, he would bring various tinctures and antidotes with him, convinced that some organization might poison his food.
Sure, this is just lamb? Yes, this is lamb. It's from taste it. See if it just tastes like lamb. That sauce.
Repelled by most of his former colleagues, mentors, companions, Fischer was as lonely as he had ever been, wandering around every day, late at night, alone. For 30 years, nobody knew what Fischer was doing or where he was. It was as if he had simply vanished from this world. In 1992, Fischer had run out of money and was living off his mother's social fares. Supposedly for this reason, he agreed to a rematch against Boris Spassky in Yugoslavia, winning it and proving that his brilliance had not faded. However, US sanctions prohibited him from competing in a Yugoslavian country.
So this is my reply to their order not to defend my title here. That's my answer.
Defying authority was nothing new for Fischer, but this time his actions made him an international fugitive, forcing him to spend years on the run, living in different countries.
Today, a federal grand jury here in Washington charged Robert James Bobby Fischer with a criminal violation of the United States imposed sanctions on the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia.
Bobby Fischer, like anyone else, should be held accountable for his actions.
Around this time, both his mother and sister passed away within 1 year, taking the last semblance of structure and safety from him. In July 2004, the former world chess champion was detained at Tokyo's international airport for attempting to leave the country using his American passport. But the US had invalidated his passport due to the outstanding arrest warrant. Fischer was held in Japanese detention for 9 months. At this point, he was a shadow of himself.
The worst thing in the world, the waste of human potential.
This was Fischer in 1972. And this was him when he got out of jail.
You were that through the first time around, think it will be better this time?
That is not true. I never... You mean I didn't want to play here? Yeah. Explain all that. That was all CIA setup. I'll explain that someday.
We look forward to that. Bobby Fischer, welcome to Iceland and thanks for talking to us. Have a good night.
Do you regret stopping? Do you regret not having defended your title against Anatoly Karpov in 1975?
No.
No regrets.
Because he refused to play me. Yeah. My conditions were absolutely fair. It's all lies. He refused to play me. I'm the champion.
Yeah, I know.
You know.
Eventually, Iceland offered him citizenship and refuge. The country that had once crowned him champion was now his exile. Fischer spent his final years in Reykjavik, living in relative isolation. On January 17, 2008, at the age of 64, the same number as squares on a chessboard, Robert James Fischer passed away. He left the world with a final twist. His last words? Nothing soothes as much as the human touch. What a contrast this beautiful phrase was to the isolated way of living. Had the man who had been alone most of his life, who fought every battle alone in devotion to the game that drove him, realized in his last moments, too late, that the obsession that fueled him had also taken away the beauty of life?
Yes, indeed. Who said this was a dog's life?
Fischer's story remains one of the most dramatic and tragic in chess history. He revolutionized the game with opening theory and elevated mid-game positioning to levels never seen before. His influence is undeniable. Modern grandmasters still study his games today, 50 years later.
Top 3 greatest players of all time.
I mean, I usually just say Fischer.
The amazing Bobby Fischer.
Bobby Fischer.
Fischer was undoubtedly the leader of his generation.
Yet, his legacy is also marked by tragedy. Although his mother Regina and his sister Joan deeply loved him and tried everything to look after him, Bobby spent most of his childhood alone. With Carmine Negro's fading relationship, he missed out on having a father figure to idolize and aim towards too. The late friend of Fischer and psychiatrist commented, he had problems, possibly certain childhood traumas that had affected him. He was misunderstood. Underneath, I think, he was a caring, sensitive person. Fischer's IQ is said to be 181, exceeding Einstein's. The 1972 match in Reykjavik was more than just a game. It was a turning point both for Fischer and the Cold War. Through a microcosm of a battlefield of 64 squares, the Cold War was partially fought with pawns and knights, instead of weapons of mass destruction. It serves as a reminder that even in times of conflict, common ground can be found in the most unexpected places. What irony it is that for Fischer, this match, his greatest victory, also marked the beginning of his disappearance from the world he had so profoundly changed. Bobby Fischer always did what he wanted, never letting anybody tell him what to do. But in a way, Fischer himself was used by a higher power in the background. For the government, Fischer was just another tactical piece to be used. Just like a pawn is being used in a game of chess, sometimes willing to be sacrificed.
Bobby, you've been playing this game since you were 6 years old. Did all this concentration to the exclusion of other activities, did this bother you? Do you think this deprived you of anything growing up?
Maybe, yeah, to some extent, yeah. Well, it would have been better, you know, a little more balanced, yeah. Maybe, you know, a little more rounded, you know, but what can you do?